All right.
Hey, thank you, Annie. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. What happened to my camera here? Oops, there we go. So one of the things I love about this meetup is that the apprentice sippers, that's what we call ourselves, or sippers for short, we're a very resourceful group. So at our January meeting, we were doing some agenda setting, and I raised a concern about the sustainability of some of these tech and non-traditional apprenticeships, and a concern about their vulnerability and downturns. And then, of course, John Dunn, Regional Director at Bay Area Community College Consortium, raised his hand and said he was preparing to go to an international conference in Australia, of all places, and maybe this topic would come up. And so this is just another example of our broad reach. We're kind of worldwide. So we're delighted that John's back from Australia and available to talk about, to share what he learned. So welcome, John. So before he starts, I just want to review some ground rules and do introductions. Please use the raised hand function. We'll be on it. We'll be watching, and we'll recognize you. Don't worry about that. And please be succinct with your comments. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to participate. So for intros, I'd just like your name, title, and organization, and I will call on you, and I will start with Annie.
As my little dog started barking. That's Sheila in the background. My name's Annie Tattinen, one of the founding members of this wonderful group. Apprenticeship is a passion of mine. Currently, I'm doing some independent consulting for small businesses around the San Francisco area. So excited to be here. Luther, do you want me to popcorn it to someone? You do it.
I'll do it. Yeah, I can handle
You're
it.
savvy.
I should introduce me too. I'm Luther Jackson. I work at NovaWorks in Sunnyvale, and I'm one of the co-founders as well. Hi, Anita.
Hi, Luther. I'm Anita Gay. I work at BACCC Media, an arts nonprofit in San Francisco, and I've been on the apprenticeship case for several years now. Really enjoying the ride. I'll let you pick the next person.
And the aforementioned John Dunn.
Hey everybody, I'm John Dunn. I'm the Regional Director of Apprenticeship for the Bay Area Community Colleges, a wonderful group of 28 colleges from Santa Rosa down to Monterey. So I'm here.
Thanks again for joining us. Sarah.
Representing two of those colleges. I'm Sarah Holtzclaw at the Director of Apprenticeship Programs at Chabot Las Positas College District.
Thank you. Hi, Erwin.
Hi, I'm Erwin Jankovic. I started the apprenticeship program at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California about 20 years ago, and have an interest more now in the applicability of apprenticeships to non-hard labor type work.
Great. Well, welcome. Vince.
Hey, Vince Kohler with Social Policy Research Associates. I was reminded today that I'm a founding member of this group, so that's exciting. And I really do miss that sipping, the real sipping. I love you guys on the screen, but sometimes brewery really feels good. And been all over the apprenticeship case for some time. Also have some exciting news about what's happening on youth apprenticeship in California at the end.
Great, thank you, Vince. Orion.
Yeah, Vince, don't you ever forget, founding member. Orion Willis, Office of Economic and Workforce Development, San Francisco, work at the Tech SF team, also a founding member of ApprenticeSIP. Good to see you all.
See you. Hi, Mindy.
Mindy Aronoff. I work at BACCC Media with Anita, and I've been at BACCC 24 years, so I've done almost everything there except for development. Grant writing I have done, though, and I'm working in Tech SF right now.
Good to see you, Mindy. Hi, Temple.
Hi, I'm just representing me, myself, and I today, as usual. So been in this club or meetup for a couple of years now. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Good to see you. Hi, Caleb.
Hi, y'all. Caleb Van Docto. I'm at Social Policy Research with Vince. I'm not a founding member, but I showed up when he told me that he was going to the Trappist in Oakland meeting. So glad to be here.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, Mark Martin. I'm the regional director for manufacturing in the Bay Area, and I've been working with apprenticeships for a while. I actually had set up the original grant that got the RD for apprenticeship started, which Adele had initially and John does now. And so I've been working with them for a while. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you. Hi, Deborah. Deborah, we can't, I know you're off mute, but can't hear you. Okay, well, that's Deborah Shepherd, South Bay Workforce Board. Who is on the phone? Did you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Serena Sinkansara. Sorry to be joining by phone. I'm running to pick up children. I'm a senior program officer at the Irvine Foundation, and I lead our apprenticeship work, and have been meaning to join one of these calls for a while. So thanks for having me and your patience as I'm multitasking to pick up children and listen on in.
Well, thank you. We're delighted to have you. Okay, now I'll shift it off to Orion.
Thanks, Luther. Yeah, so John, I'll kind of get us started off with some questions and then we'll just kind of open it up to the group. And Sabrina, I'm going to join you in a second. I'll be in my car going to pick up some kiddos as well. But John, I think first is just, I'd like you to give us an overview or a summary of what the event was. And then I'd like you to kind of maybe detail what one of your favorite takeaways was from the Australian system, if not, you know, some best practices from maybe another country that was at the round table.
So the event was the Global Apprenticeship Network, New Zealand and Australia event. And it had some folks from Switzerland there too. Different folks than I had met before. They weren't from the CMETS group that we've all talked to in the past, Katie Caves and that group. And it was organized by the Apprenticeship Employment Network, on site at least. The Global Apprenticeship Network is actually a pretty big, it is global, and they are a network. But they have some Central and South America groups. They've got Asia, Australia, they've got Africa and Europe, of course. So it's an interesting group that is organizing, and the United States is, I believe, starting to connect to that group through Marty Leathers, if you've met him before. And he may actually be a good person to have on here in the future to talk about. So he's on 3 or 4 different projects these days. So they really focused on their version of intermediaries, and they call those intermediaries group training organizations is how they think of it. And these GTOs, and I'll actually drop the link in. I dropped the link in for the Apprenticeship Employment Network. Hopefully that'll work. Yeah, it's working. And so they were trying to share best practices amongst themselves as much as possible. And a lot of it focused on the same stuff we talk about. How do we recruit more employers? How do we prepare apprentices to be on the job? That may be one of the bigger takeaways, is the prep work that they think about, they do. And then how can they improve their systems for success and successful apprenticeship completions in their world. And I did actually also got to meet with the Victorian state version of the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. So I got to hang out with the government people a little bit too, which was good. And strangely enough, they were in the middle of a restructuring that we almost did with that. What was it? The Department of Better Jobs and Higher Wages, or whatever that was going to be called. They were essentially doing a very similar reorg that day that I met with them. So it was good to listen to the government folks. Government wise, they kind of operate in a similar fashion, maybe not the same structure in terms of standards when we think about the document, but they have a document that outlines the apprenticeship. One of the big takeaways was one, they subsidize wages for apprentices up until either the end of their 21st year or until they turn 21. I can't remember which one it was, but that benefits getting younger people into apprenticeships. But I actually had a chance to hang out with a friend that his family used to live here in the Sacramento area from Australia. They lived nearby, and their 23-year-old son played baseball with my son, and he is now kind of aged out of their apprenticeship system. And we talked about that a lot because his son missed the window, and if the employers aren't getting a wage subsidy, they're not participating, or they're not going to hire that person. So that's something for us to think about. And we don't, we're not doing those things necessarily, but if we get into that world, it is excluding people from either re-entering the workforce as an apprentice or upskilling or whatever. The other big takeaway, I think, was the preparatory work. They don't really call it a pre-apprenticeship, but these GTOs act as a staffing agency. Most of the time, they are the employer of record also during the apprenticeship. So they are actually collecting that wage subsidy. They charge the employers like a staffing group would to find and recruit and place and support the apprentices. But their ratio, they have, it might be called like an apprenticeship success coordinator or student success coordinator in our world. The ones that I talked to have about a 30-to-1 ratio of apprentices to one counselor. Really, it's somebody who's a third-party mentor for the apprentice, not the on-the-job mentor, but they are skilled enough to support the apprentice. They meet with the apprentice within the first week that they're on the job to make sure everything's going okay. Whereas the government folks said, we're lucky if we get to them in the first 3 months. And by that point, things have gone sideways, I'm sure. And what they do, and that person is also responsible for communicating with the employer, understanding the employer's needs for apprentices. They're almost like a sales rep. When I saw them talking to the employers, it's like a sales rep, because you have a product really in that world. And they really understand the employer's situation and the industry, that particular industry. So it's pretty interesting. It's I think I've always been a big believer in going and visiting and learning more that way. But when we've talked about this in terms of visiting Switzerland and other places, the cost, we hear about the cost. But until I actually got there and saw it, I didn't get it as well. And I think that model it's really a little bit closer to ours in that it leverages, they have their version of apprentice or community colleges called TAFEs, TAEF. And that's a trade school. It's a government-ish trade school, but they don't have the academic piece that our community colleges do. It's very much a vocational, and that includes medical and IT and construction, those things. So they do leverage that kind of a government resource for the educational component. I'm going to drop in another just a picture. I just took a picture of this from the brochure, the agenda for the conference. So if you see there, that's kind of how they see themselves in terms of the interaction between the different bits and pieces and parts. Although when I look in there, it doesn't show government, does it? Necessarily in terms of the registration. So the registered training organizations can be the group training organization also, as well as the local TAFE. So that's kind of how they look at themselves. Any questions? I'll shut up.
Yeah, I'm just, that is super interesting. So like, if you could just get paid to travel around the world and learn about different models of apprenticeship, it sounds like you'd be interested or a good candidate. So you can time out or age out of being an apprentice, right? There's an apprenticeable kind of age range, it sounds like.
No,
and then
it's the wage subsidy ends.
the wage subsidy will end when you're a certain, okay. I'm wondering, and then open it up to the rest of the group. Was there anything that you feel Australia could learn from America's apprenticeship systems or practices?
One, that wage subsidy, the way it's set up, excludes people. That may be the biggest one. It looked like I wouldn't want people to change how they do their paperwork and their documents. The little bit that I saw of their standards, they're close enough to what we do, and ours are a contract based on US law, basically. So I think from the government side, they're doing some pretty cool stuff like we are. So it wasn't nothing really jumped out that I think our community colleges really stand out though. Our system of higher education is different. I don't think anybody else has it. And there was one person from Canada there, same kind of problems that they have, that they have some very interesting rules around the classroom instruction, the RTI, RSI. I think we do that. I think we perhaps do that better and maybe a little bit more rigorously than they do. So.
Mark?
Yeah, Annie, your dog look hungry.
Tortilla chips.
So, John, I didn't ask you about this, but what sort of penetration do they have on apprenticeships? Like, how many do they have? Do they feel like it's strong? And then what's that wage subsidy that they offer? Do you know percentage?
It was at least half. It was at least half of the wages. It sounded like it was pretty strong enough to discourage employers of hiring older people.
Yeah, that's significant. Is there do they have a pretty wide establishment of apprenticeships there, or?
So most of it was focused on the state of Victoria. So talking to them, they have 60,000 apprentices in that state. And that state is is the second largest in terms of population besides New South Wales, where Sydney is. So Victoria has 6 or 7 million people in it and 60,000 apprentices.
So they're
much better.
A fifth of California, and they have about a half, because we have 95 or 100,000. That's
no, we're back to 89, I think.
Yeah, building and construction trades. Well, it's interesting because I mean, yeah, other countries, I don't know how Germany does it or Switzerland, which then you probably are aware as far as wage subsidy or the adoption of it. England, what they do is you can actually pay apprentices less in England than the minimum wage, is my understanding from what I looked at. And so you are, as a company, are kind of motivated to have apprenticeships because you can pay them less than you would if they weren't an apprentice kind of starting in that role. So it's interesting that there's that level of wage subsidy.
Thanks, Mark. Sarah?
I can't remember if you said this. We had a meeting with John and some other college people yesterday. I can't remember if you said what their occupations, what do they train in?
Originally, just like us, a lot of the building trades, that was their, and I did learn about that. They organize their occupations. It sounded like a little more broadly, similar to Switzerland and the bigger groups. And I was just looking at the brochure. So out of the 6,000 apprentices trained by this GTO membership organization, they've got them in building trades and construction, electro technology, which I'm thinking is regular electrician wiring, inside wiring plus high voltage, it sounds like. over 800 in business services. So those
Mm.
those business office careers, community services and health. I don't know what a primary industry is, but it might be agriculture and things like that. Engineering, and a lot in automotive, actually. That's the biggest group here on this list. So that's good. 10,000 host employers around the region. So they are pretty well spread out. And when I went to Victoria University, which is one of the TAFEs, and they had not only traditional wood shop, cabinetry, masonry, but they had IT, cybersecurity, they had robotics and like mechatronics going on, and then healthcare and some other things. So similar to us, they're looking to expand the reach into new occupations or new areas, but they're already in a lot of places, and people already accept it as a good pathway. So,
Erwin?
Yeah, did you get any indication of what happens to the apprentices after they're in an organization and out of the program?
yeah, so I visited with two of them. One of them is at an oil and natural gas refinery, and she was so well liked that she wanted. It's interesting. The group training organization is the employer of record, and when they finish, they don't necessarily have a job exactly right at that location. And sometimes they encourage them to go to another location and circle back later. But it sounded like they had an 80 to 90% or more uptake of the apprentices post-apprenticeship, because they do such a good job of holding their hands and making sure they're successful. And part of the GTO's job is to make sure they get a job when they're done. So it's not the same as our building trade. So.
Well, but the other half of that question, though, is the narrow focus of that type of apprenticeship training inhibiting their ability to move around within the organization after they've been there for a while? Did you get any indication on that?
That really depends on the apprentice. So the one particular one in she's an electronics troubleshooting. It's interesting how broad the skill set. This young woman's 21 years old, 22 years old, and she's finishing her apprenticeship right now. The skills that she learns on the job there, between a little bit of welding, mechatronics, electrical, light and medium voltage. We talked to some of the other folks that work there, and they said she needs to go out on the job and work as a non-apprentice for a few years to learn how to operate independently and be, on her own on a job site. Whereas the apprentices generally always have an extra person with them wherever they go. But they said the one guy that runs all of the safety on the entire facility said she should be in my job in about 10 years. So, because she understands the entire refinery. So it seems like they do a very good job of getting a very well-rounded apprenticeship, so that you have multiple occupations that you could go into later that would feed off of that foundation.
Okay.
And I'm sure that it's never perfect. Here, I'll drop in the picture. Where is that at? Well, where'd it go? Oh, I've got a nice picture of me in my safety outfit. Here, I'll share my screen for a second. There we go. That's cute, huh?
Nice.
So the taller young woman is the apprentice, and the other woman is she's the group training organization mentor, supportive person, career counselor, and they also have regular career counselors in their organization too to help people out. So it was pretty cool. We got to put on our hard hats and our safety gear and steel-toed boots and all that fun stuff. So pretty neat. And my grandfather worked at one of the refineries over in Martinez forever, and I never got to see where he worked. I think this was probably similar at the Shell refinery, so kind of cool. And it is unbelievably, you're very aware of how dangerous that place is, by the way. It's amazing. There's a lot of gases and weird stuff that could go wrong just every day. So
Annie?
Thanks, Luther. John, I was wondering about and I'm sorry if you mentioned this and I just missed it, but how those sort of career counselors are typically funded, because that sounds like a really important role. So they don't necessarily need to be of the trades, but just, someone, a mentor, someone for the apprentice to check in with.
yeah, it's funded through the fees that the employers pay to the group training org. So in talking to, it was once some of there was probably 10 different companies there at the conference. Once they heard about the Apprenticeship Innovation Fund, they got very interested in talking to me. So I was kind of popular because they saw the money, because they're thinking about expanding. A bunch of them are not just in Australia, they're in New Zealand too, and they're in Micronesia and places like that. So they are funded by that. I told them about it. I said, hey, is that price point per apprentice something that would allow you all to function as an intermediary in California? And they were like, yeah, we could probably figure out a business model that fit that, which means $2,000 or $2,500 might be the actual number that they would require. So who knows? But they seem to think that was enough money to, if you had enough scale of apprentices, you could keep an operation running. So.
John, I have one more question. Did you find any difference in the screening criteria they use than what we in America tend to use, and especially between different types of apprentices?
I didn't get too deep into that, but I had the little bit that I heard, it sounds like they probably screen even harder than we do, because one, they have some of the resources allow for that extra recruitment and extra prep time, but because they are acting they're nonprofits generally, but they're acting in an entrepreneurial way. They need to make sure that the apprentices that they are bringing to the employers are successful. So they have an incentive to make sure that works pretty well. I don't know about some of the building trades and different things that, I saw an awful lot of construction and an awful lot of apprentices running around on job sites downtown Melbourne. So not sure how they do it, but could be similar to ours.
John, on that point, what's the role of organized labor and apprenticeship any different from ours? And are they making any forays, organized labor making any forays into sort of non-building trades apprenticeships?
From what I gathered, it's all in the building trades. I know that the UA is pretty strong there, the plumbers and pipe fitters. In previous jobs, I've had that conversation with the UA. I know that their international is active in Australia and probably New Zealand. They're very similar that way. Beyond the building trades, I didn't get the sense that they have, SEIUs or UFCWs or unions like that. I didn't ask that question, but it seemed like that was really focused on the building trades and traditional places for labor to be active. So good question, and I will ask about that actually.
Vince, you had some comments in the chat. Did there were any questions or points you wanted to raise?
Well, I was just drawing an interesting contrast between sort of wage subsidy model, which also, I mean, in the UK, they use the levy, right? The levy that all employers pay into. And then if you become a training organization, you can draw from the levy to pay and essentially get a subsidy for the training wage. I don't know whether Australia uses that model. I don't know where the subsidies come from that, John, you were speaking to. I don't know whether that came up. Do you know? Is that just a tax?
It's from the
Tax?
government via taxes, yeah.
Yeah.
There-
I think the big contrast there is that in general, say Germany, Switzerland, Austria, there's no subsidy that goes to the employer. So the employer does, but the employer has the trade-off is that these training wages are quite low. And so then employers have an incentive to train because they get someone at relatively a reduced rate, but the trade-off is you are training that person. So again, you can look at it, as I pointed out in the chat, as a well-paid education or not as opposed to a low-paid job. Then in exchange, there's no subsidies. So employers do not get any money from the government.
I'm going to steal that, Vince. I don't think I've ever heard you say it that way. That's a well-paid education, as opposed to this one back here.
Right, exactly. I mean, the idea is, do you want to go into debt or do you want to have a positive income flow? And again, at the age that these youths are at, and I was going to ask you, John, maybe you've mentioned this, do you have a sense of the sort of median age of Australian apprentices?
Young. The other apprentice I got to talk to a little bit, she was 17 years old.
Okay.
Just got started. I mean, her boots weren't dirty yet at all at a wastewater treatment plant. And she still had braces on. And they loved her already. You know, they had prepped her and she was ready to go. So I think much younger than what we're doing.
Right. And again, in general, that makes it more palatable. If you're trying to get someone at 30 into an apprenticeship, well, then paying them sub minimum wage is hard to stomach. But if they're 16 or 17 or 18, that's actually a pretty good deal. Especially if you know at the end is a $60,000 or $80,000 job.
Thanks, Vince. Anita.
Thanks. So sort of a general question. Apologies if you've already addressed it. I know we've covered a lot already, but what would you say for you is sort of one of the more inspiring takeaways, or any inspiring takeaways that would be potentially applicable to American apprenticeships, like sort of something that we could sort of bring in as a model, or sort of something encouraging that would, I guess I ask this because I have a lot of experience at this point hearing about the Swiss model and kind of talking to Swiss apprentices, and it seems so many leagues ahead of where we're at in America, and just wondering if there's anything that your Australian experience could like speak to. It's something that we could kind of tackle on a small scale here.
Well, I think we're starting it with our youth, you know, when we call it youth apprenticeship, we're starting that conversation. They obviously have a much more integrated or there's better awareness there around apprenticeship, and it's a viable pathway to a good job, and we're getting better at that. But I think it's and Vince, we can talk about this later. I'm in all the stuff that, and people we've talked to about the Swiss model, I didn't get to see it, because in this trip I got to see it in action, that mentoring, that supportive services, you know, that it seemed to be a much deeper commitment to making sure that the apprentice was happy and healthy and working well. And we have the ability to do that. We just, a lot of that stuff, and we talked about this yesterday, Sarah, we have all of those things in our world, but they're in different places. They're not all in one location. So I think the very intensive, supportive, you know, wraparound services, and the prep work, I think, to make sure people are in the right job immediately when they start. So
Thanks, John. Kristen, and then Sarah.
Thanks, Luther. This is just reminding me so much. Caleb and I had an opportunity last month to go to Maine, and in Maine, one of the big inspirations for a lot of the scaling they were doing was a trip to Germany. So just to underscore the point of seeing somewhere else makes new things possible. And I understand all the difficulties with expenses and can't travel and blah, blah, blah. But I do think it's a very, very serious thing to dismiss too easily. So I just want to raise that point. And in that conversation, the conversations we had with Maine, building on some of Mark's comments and Vince's comments, I think this point about the training wage, as well as all of the aspects of the specific apprenticeship model that John named, like it's younger, it's group-based, it's sort of grouped around sort of occupational groupings rather than narrow occupations. All of those are design features that go together. They're not like independent kind of features of apprenticeship. And I think that's a really important point, because the reason those all go together is because apprenticeship in all those other places comes from the point of view of being, as Vince was talking about, a well-paid education rather than a low-paid job. And so our orientation toward apprenticeship tends to be from the workforce side, which tends to be more about like gap filling, right? So it's sort of seen as this, it's sort of seen more in that context. But so I just want to make that point, like the logic of younger exposure to groups of occupational skills rather than a single occupational skills, the training wage, the fact that there's a mentor outside your specific workplace, all of those things are about an intervention that is an education and training intervention. They go together. They're not just like individual aspects of a random apprenticeship somewhere. So I just think that's a really important point to consider, because a lot of those things sort of change if suddenly the average wage is 30. Right, like that fundamentally changes the thing and also the demand for it. So anyway, just to make that sort of connectivity point.
Thanks, Kristen. Sarah, and then Mark.
I think that to add on to Kristen's is that it sounds like both in Australia and Switzerland, Germany, that there's a common structure to all of these apprentices, and that's backed by the agencies, the government, whatever it is. Where here in California and across the United States, this was very evident yesterday when a bunch of colleges got together and were talking about how we do things, right? That I do something differently, and Cabrillo does something differently, and this occupation does something, LinkedIn does it differently than Twitch. I mean, that there's no standard really that we're all playing under, which makes it harder to unify and get stuff done when we're all doing different things. I mean, we have a standard that the DAS says, yeah, you got to do these elements, but in that it's free for all after that.
And we have to tie it to a very narrow ONET code.
Yeah.
You know, we sort of have to. We don't really have to.
Thanks for the question, Sarah. Mark, and then Vince.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, we look to Germany and, maybe now Switzerland, which is actually fairly recent to my understanding. And again, Vince, you know very much about this because I learned about it from you, but that they've established it relatively recently compared to Germany, which has been a lot longer, I think. But it's what is possible when if we talk about emulating those or reaching their success, not even emulating, because this whole idea that Germany and Switzerland has this, you're young and they're going to pay you less / they're going to give you a well-paid education is a mindset that I'm not going to say we could never do here, but we're a long ways from that, because we can't even, it's hard to get a high schooler to think about going into the trades. And so we catch them when they're later. So I guess I'm really curious as to what are some of the other structures that we could understand about them that might work. So I'd be curious as to what sort of adoption rate there is in, would you you kind of gave it in Australia. But I'd really be interested in what is their infrastructure like from the government side, like what, you're an RD for apprenticeship, John, which we've kind of cobbled together. It's not an official thing yet, but we've just gotten the AIF. So like, what do they have equivalent there? Do they have we have our DAS, which is the most established thing we have. But beyond that, it's kind of up to the organization or the apprenticeship organization to, figure out a person to run it. There's nobody at the company level, really. There's starting to be people like Sarah at the college level, but I'd be curious to see how these other countries pay for and what kind of structure they have.
Yeah, I had a chance to have lunch with some folks before we met with some of the government folks before we went to their offices, and I'll put a link in here in a second on their website. They have, similar to other states in our lovely country, their workforce and their educational people have been siloed, but they were at least more under the same umbrella in a way than we have. When I look around Sacramento, it's the Department of Ed, it's the Chancellor's Office, it's Labor and Workforce Development, and they're all separate. And they seemed, while they were siloed and they did acknowledge that, they weren't as, the concept of breaking those into those parts wasn't there. They were much more organized and cohesive than we are. So but they did acknowledge it ain't great, but they're trying to get it better. But they don't have to fight about our silos between K-12 and community college and CSUs and things like that. So
Vince?
Yeah, I think the point I think that Sarah made and Kristen also about not making these things too narrow is important. So what John mentioned about the fact that this person, this apprentice will get to know the whole refinery, that is, I think, a kind of a huge deal in terms of the approach to the apprenticeship itself, of how permeable that or how employable that person will become. I do think we have some very hopeful signs in the US as well of making it systemic. You're right, Sarah, that I think here we don't have very many examples, at least not in California, where this is perceived to be one system, right? I mean, community college to community college, it's different program to program. We think of it as opposed to sort of a system. But there are other states, like Wisconsin comes to mind. Washington State has since in the last 4 years really reformed their whole system. Again, this is youth oriented through Career Connect, and they have now what they call Career Launch. And their goal is that 100% of high schoolers will have access and will have exposure to careers and will have an opportunity at entering an apprenticeship if they want to. That's not the assumption. It's not that 100% will take it, but it could eventually be at a similar rate to some of these European countries where the take-up rate is between 50 to 75% of young people enter those pathways, but not as an alternative to college, as another way to college. So that's the important thing. So I do think we have some examples in the US that are, and it just occurred to me, we should probably at one of the ApprenticeSIPs invite the director of the Washington system to speak to us, because she has a lot of interesting stories to tell. And it's I think we're sort of 4 or 5 years behind Washington State in where we are in terms of system building on the youth side. And so that could be interesting I expect that we could persuade her to join this group.
Yeah, we're always looking for names and be happy to reach out.
Erwin.
Yeah, it's not just in Australia, but does anybody seem to be worrying about reducing the amount of time it takes to get people through an apprentice program and using new technologies, augmented reality and virtual, which are being used in industry, but I haven't seen our apprentice programs moving in that direction.
On the building trade side, they are using, I know the plumbers and pipe fitters and probably electricians and some of the others, operating engineers are using a lot more technology in their training centers. You know, simulators, AR, VR. I didn't see much of that in Australia other than the robotic stuff, but we didn't get into that too much. I have, for any outside of the building trades, I think, yes, we are trying to do that. 1 to 2 year apprenticeships, depending on the skill set, depending on what's required, if you're able to work full time. But if you're going to start your apprenticeship as a senior in high school and you can only work part time, it is going to take a little bit longer to finish the OJT piece. And even if that's 2,000 hours or maybe 3,000 hours, it will take a little bit more time to get through that. And I think those are important hours for a young person to be on the job. I wouldn't want to shorten that too much at all. So yeah, I mean, most of those are in the 1 to 2 to 3 year range at the most, but knowing what I know about the building trades training, they have to learn so many more things these days than they used to be a competent and professional and safe electrician or plumber, pipe fitter. There's some really intensive stuff they've got to pick up, and this might be an opportunity maybe for this group to go visit one of the training centers in the future too and see what they do. It'd be great to have this group go down to the plumbers and pipe fitters either in San Jose or in Walnut Creek, Concord. The electricians, the IBEW Center in Fremont is fantastic. It's pretty cool. So we can do that if we want.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach to getting them through faster is really just more of the competency based approach, because I don't necessarily know that I want to get the person building the bridge through faster. I just want to make sure, well, I would, but I want to make sure that they have the skill set. So I think the competency base is what they were trying to do with that. And it's VR, AR. I've looked at a lot of it on the manufacturing side for the virtual reality. I still have not seen it. I mean, I might be able to help, but I think it's around the edges. The simulators are nice, but I don't see that as rapidly advancing, kind of gaining the skill sets. It might help in some instances, but it's still improving and getting better.
Erwin, did you have another question?
Now I've got to lower my hand. There you go.
John, I have a question. It seems here, I mean, that we're often in this dichotomy, right? It's either you go the apprenticeship route or college, which seems very very linear and non-flexible. Is there any discussion in Australia about kind of a both and, of even someone starting out in the trades or on the work site for a while and decide, hey, I like project management. I'm interested in being an estimator and I'll go back for something like that?
I don't know if their educational system is open to that, returning for small short-term learning or an AA degree as we would look at it. But I'm going to ask about that. It didn't. So the Victoria University that I went to, that is very vocationally oriented, that was the one I saw. If you go to the regular university system, it appears to be very academic in nature. And I don't know if they have a 2-year version of that like we do. I don't think so. That's as progressive as they are in a lot of ways. They are traditional in other ways in that university path, it appears. So
They had a lot of class structure history in Australia.
yeah. And as we're doing the talking, I was there for 7-8 days of actual work and doing things. Man, I feel like I didn't learn anything now. I've got a bunch of questions now. I didn't get a chance to go to learn all these extra things. So I can fix that and get some more information and bring it back. But yeah, I can, and I also can't recommend enough going and visiting there. It's a fantastic city. So
is this a regularly occurring conference, or like annual, or is it?
Yeah, I think I was preparing for today. I went to their website or I looked around and I thought I saw that it might be back in Australia again, but I think it feels like they move it around. So and not just because of the global network, but they are regionalized into Australasia, that South Asia, Southeast Asia kind of region, which is gigantic if you traveled around there. So it's a very big place.
I know Boeing has been using augmented reality stuff a lot to actually help build the airplane. And it's kind of like a step-by-step guide to say, you know, when you're learning, you do this, and now you do this, and you do that. And I don't know whether that's been incorporated into the programs throughout Washington, but Boeing is everywhere, so.
AC Transit is starting to use that in their machinists and their mechanics, bus mechanics.
I think we have time maybe for one last question, and then I'll turn it over to Anita. Okay. Well, John, you've answered all of our questions. Thank
Maybe
you.
John, I have a question, Luther. Sorry, just sort of a like bring it all together, John, in terms of your own work with BACCC. What are you kind of excited to be working on next, or how can we, you know, maybe get involved? I love Vince's. We've gotten some great speaker recommendations, so thank you.
Yeah.
It's always wonderful.
I think that our conversation that Sarah and some, you know, and Mark was there, some community college folks about the upcoming group of intermediaries that are not part of our educational or governmental system. They're coming here. How do we deal with that? How do we ensure? There was a lot of talk yesterday about ensuring that the apprentice has a safe job site. You know, who takes care of that if they're not part of our world, and if the intermediary is interacting with the colleges by using the colleges as the educational component, what responsibility do we have to our students on that work side if somebody else is kind of responsible for that? So I think that's why we met yesterday, to have these conversations and start thinking about it. And that yesterday's conversation made me think we need 6 more at this point. So that's okay. That's what I'm working on right now is that and data, actually a bunch of data stuff, but because we don't have enough data around our world yet. So
Vince, you had a couple of points you wanted to make?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee has started meeting, and it meets monthly, usually on the first Monday of the month. And I'll post the link to it to those meetings in the chat. We're actually, together with California Workforce Association, are staffing these meetings in part. It's a Division of Apprenticeship Standard run effort. And the goal over 18 months is to write the plan for the California Youth Apprenticeship System. So in some ways, it should answer some of the questions that have been brought up that, you know, that are currently feel a little disconnected, to put it mildly. And so that is the goal. And so if you're interested, if you have ideas, if you have experience, please tune into those meetings. And we will actually we've already featured some models around the world and around the country. We will be featuring Washington as a case study at a future meeting. Not totally set yet when that will be. So there are slides on that website. And then I did also want to mention there are really seats on the CEMETS Summer Institute delegation. So if you are interested, you got to act quickly. We're already past the deadline, but we still have some room. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. And then finally, the director of CEMETS is coming to San Francisco on April 21. We'll probably put together a breakfast, maybe somewhere on the waterfront. So if you're interested, in getting to, and we'll bring in some industry folks as well. So if you're interested in joining that, let me know as well, and we'd love to have you.
Thanks so much, Vince. That's great info. I know we're at time, so I'll make this brief, but I wanted to let you guys know that our next speaker will be joining us on April 26th. It will be Josh Christensen, who's a project director with the Partnership on Inclusive Apprenticeship. And there's a link to that organization. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Keep an eye out for an email from me with more info. And in the meantime, join, some more links coming your way, join our meetup group. And if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would enjoy these sessions, I have an email list going. So all the emails come from me. Send any emails you like my way, I'll add them to the list. They can always unsubscribe. I'm not going to force anything on anyone. So yeah, share your names and emails with me, join our meetup group, and we'll see you next month, hopefully. And we're also working on another in-person gathering this summer for folks that live in the Bay Area.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us and bringing back the intel from abroad.
And a cricket ball. I just realized I got a cricket ball here.
That could cause some damage.
I was gonna say you
It's very hard, yes.
The Bay Area
John,
is getting its own professional cricket league.
You beat me to the punch. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I think it's in Oakland or something, right?
Fremont, maybe?
They play cricket down the street from my mom's house in Lodi. So
Oh, cool.
it's a global sport, people. Let's go.
Yeah.
You can do a lesson on explaining the rules.
Yeah.
I barely figured it out. Barely.
The games take days.
Yeah.
If you have the Calm app, there is actually a guy from England who does one of the like put you to sleep kind of things is cricket rules.
Oh, good. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I'm late. I just dropped in from a very long day. So interesting conversation. Thank you.
Oh, Peter,
Good
it's
to
so
see
good
you.
to see you.
Yeah.
Hi.
We need to stay in touch. Okay.
Yes, we
so-
do.
All right. So we will.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
John.
Everyone, see you in April.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
Bye.